I never expected to become an Onlyfans creator. Not in a million years. Being raised in a very conservative household where the fear of God has been instilled in me from a very early age, it was impossible to imagine breaking away from everything I knew and had been taught to uphold. It was only when my mom and I ran away from the farm compound we lived in with our family and started interacting with other people who weren't raised the same way that I realized that I had been in a cult. My mom missed my brothers and dad too much and went back after a while, but I didn't. It took many years for me to unlearn all those crazy nonsense things that they fed us, all while learning about the world and how I could fit into it. It was a future I could have never predicted or expected as a child, when my whole life centered around an unrealistic expectations of a lunatic with severe delusions of grandeur that led vulnerable people into a hopeless situation. Neither did I expect, once I made the jump to OnlyFans, that my account would blow up the way it did. Amidst the pandemic, I lost my job and was left completely hopeless and unsure about how I was supposed to pay many bills. One day, as I was mindlessly scrolling through Facebook, I saw a post from an old acquaintance with some risque photos and a link to see more of her. And that led me down the rabbit hole of research, and I ended up watching every single OnlyFans advice video I could find online to understand how things worked and if it was really something I could bring myself to do. The first few weeks were very rough. To try to ease myself into it, I started as a no-face creator and stayed that way for about 2 months, until the day I mentioned, while chatting with my audience, that I had recently gotten into anime, and someone suggested that I do cosplay content. And that was an absolute game changer. I found my niche and became a top 1% creator within 4 months. With all the production involved in cosplay, wigs, colored contacts, character acting, and elaborate outfits, I was virtually unrecognizable once fully made up. I felt like I had the best of both worlds. That was 3 years ago. And although my popularity has had its ups and downs, I still had a large audience of loyal fans who never let me down. Yes, there were eventual creeps with stalker tendencies here and there, but they always gave up, eventually. But that was until I started receiving some unnerving packages in the mail. I had a P.O. box set up in my year 1 of my OnlyFans journey because some audience members wanted to send me some specific cosplays to wear in photo shoots or live chats, and it sounded like a win-win. The creepy packages started with what I would describe as a fairly average stalker mail. Mangled and torn up photos of me from a cosplay photo bundle I'd done a few weeks prior. No note or anything else inside. The next package was slightly more concerning, with my photos intact but threatening messages written on the back, along the lines of "die" and "you are disgusting." The next package also came with photos, but ones taken of me just out and about, running errands. And that one really freaked me out, because it meant whoever was doing this knew who I was and where I lived. One day, I came home from the gym to find an unmarked box at my front door. I called 911 and explained to the dispatcher what had been happening, and that I was afraid to open the package since no one was supposed to know my address. I redirected all my mail to the P.O. box, including my personal ones. On top of that, my house was kind of secluded. My closest neighbor ran a hunting lodge, and only ever saw him on the off chance when he was in the woods that we shared, setting up traps big enough to catch a bear. She told me that unless I had a reason to believe that there was a bomb inside the box, there was nothing she could do preemptively. I would have to open up the box and find out. So I did. The contents were more or less the same as the other packages. Some photos and some insults that could be interpreted as vague threats, but nothing direct or immediate. Just like all the previous ones, that too was signed with XOXO, mimicking the way I always say goodbye to fans after ending my live chats. The dispatcher instructed me to file a report with the police if the packages continued to show up at my door, and to install some cameras around the property, and an alarm if I didn't already have one. I followed her advice and installed a Ring camera since I already had an alarm. Things were quiet after that, and I assumed that the obsessed fan had simply moved on to someone else. 2 months went by without another scary experience, and I let my guard down. Big mistake. I was doing one of my special events, a whole month of requested cosplays, that time being One Piece, when I thought I heard a knock at the front door, downstairs. I asked my audience if they heard anything, but they all said no. A few minutes later, I heard the knock again, and that time, I was sure of it. It was loud enough that even people in the chat could hear it. When the knocks were followed by the frantic buzz of the doorbell, I checked my Ring camera app to see who it was. To my surprise, I found the screen fully black. I didn't know if someone had managed to disable it without me realizing it or if it had been covered somehow. Either way, there was someone lurking outside my house in the middle of the night. I was about to end the live chat to call the police when the power went out. Just like that, I was left in total darkness. Barricading myself inside the room, I dialed 911 and went on a full rant as soon as the operator answered the call. "Please, you have to help me. Someone is lurking outside my house trying to break in. The power went out. I think they cut it, so I locked myself in my bedroom just in case." "Okay, ma'am, do you have a security system installed?" "I do, but the power went out. Will it still work?" "It depends on the system, ma'am. Do you see what the intruder looked like?" "No, when I checked my phone, my Ring camera was black. I think they covered it with something. Please hurry." My phone had little to no service when I called, so I don't think they could pinpoint my exact location, and instead had to rely on my poor direction-giving skills. Just in case, I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher. Everything was so quiet after that. All I could hear was my own heavy breathing. "Are they anywhere nearby already?" "The officers are about 20 minutes away from your location that you provided." At that time, 20 minutes seemed like 20 hours. My eyes were glued to the door, looking for any slight movement or for a shadow to cross through the threshold. Anything that you can indicate the presence of someone else. My worst fears came true when I saw the door handle turning, ever so slowly. "He's inside the house," I whispered to the operator. "He's trying to get into my bedroom." The handle started to shake violently as the person tried to get in. After that, it was silent again, until I heard the deafening noise of a gunshot that shattered the metal piece. The heavy dresser against the door wouldn't stop him for long. My only chance was getting out of the bedroom through the window. I crawled across the roof until I reached one of the trellis bolted to the walls and climbed down. When I looked up, I saw a masked man staring at me through my open window. It would take him some time to go downstairs and into the front yard, so I still had a chance to run towards the woods. As soon as I turned around, I felt a piercing pain on my side, followed by a warm gush running down my stomach. With blurry eyes, I saw another masked man standing right in front of me, the blade of his knife dripping with blood. My blood. Somehow he seemed surprised, almost as if he didn't intend to stab me. I fell to my knees just as the other man joined us, and they both just stood there, staring at me. "Why?" Then, the one with the knife lunged at me, all his weight to pin me to the ground. Up close, I could see he had big blue eyes that were very similar to mine. Too similar. It couldn't be. Michael? The blue eyes widened desperately, and he looked back at the other one as if asking for guidance. That was all the confirmation I needed. I had seen the same motion countless of times before. I was staring at Michael, my younger brother, which meant that the other man was most likely my older brother, Joshua. It seemed that being recognized wasn't part of that plan, because Michael was clearly taken aback, panicking, and I knew his weak point. He had been born with a malformation in one of his legs, making it much shorter than the other. If I could get away from under him and run, he wouldn't be able to follow, and then I could worry about the biggest threat, Joshua and the gun. All I had to do was distract him for a while longer. "Michael, please don't hurt me," I pleaded, reaching out to touch his face under the balaclava. He wavered, and I took my chance, jamming my fingers into his eyes. As soon as he stumbled back, I pushed the rest of him off of me all the way, and he fell on top of Joshua, both of them falling to the ground, and then I ran towards the woods. I didn't know if I would make it to the neighbor's lodge, but I knew he was a hunter, and I knew he wouldn't hesitate to shoot whoever was necessary. If I got close enough, all I had to do was scream for help. I ran until the soles of my feet were raw from scraping against loose twigs and gritty rocks. I was bleeding, completely terrified, and beyond exhausted. But I was going to make it. I was going to... A gunshot landed right beside my feet, forcing me to stop. Damn. "Do you like my gift, Sophie?" I didn't say anything, so he went on. "Turn around and answer me." "You're a sick ass, Josh," I answered once we were facing each other. Always were. Always will be. "I'm just ridding the world of another Jezebel. Dad would be proud of me. Mom, too." The mention of my mom was too much for me, and I felt all the adrenaline leaving my body. I didn't have any strength left. "God have mercy on your soul, sinner." I heard him approaching, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The police wouldn't get there in time to save me, and even if my neighbors heard the gunshot, neither would he. I was going to die alone in the middle of the woods, and no one to mourn me. And that was when I heard Joshua scream, a scream like I'd never heard before or after that. I opened my eyes and saw that he had stepped in one of the big traps set by my neighbor. Risking a closer look, I noticed that both jaws, when closed, were large enough to almost meet in the middle, nearly severing his foot from his ankle. Every time he tried to open the jaws, they would slip from his grip, cutting even deeper than before. I also noticed that in his desperate attempts to free himself, he lost hold of the gun. Walking towards him, I unceremoniously grabbed the gun from the ground. I could either shoot him and end his misery, or I could leave him and wait until he died from blood loss. Instead, I opted for stepping over the semi-closed trap with all my strength, effectively severing his foot. Joshua cursed and screamed, coiling on the ground like a wounded snake. The blood was slowly gathering around him. It looked almost black in the moonlight. Distantly, I heard the sound of police sirens approaching as the red and blue lights lit the surroundings in brief intervals. Too little too late, I thought, checking the gun to see how many rounds it still had. Either way, I only needed one. I still had Michael to take care of.
My boyfriend Tommy and I had been together for a long time, and I thought things were going well. But one day, I was checking our joint bank accounts online when I noticed that he'd been withdrawing a lot of our money. He took out $150 each month, plus a few one-off payments for several $100s. All of it was going to some Onlyfans accounts. Tommy knew that I wasn't good about checking finances, so I guess he thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't know much about OnlyFans, but I assume he was watching something X-rated. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have anything against it, but he was spending way too much on it. I knew I should have talked to him about it directly, but I was embarrassed. So when he was out of the house, I snuck into his private office and switched on his computer. I already knew his password, so I didn't have any problems connecting to his internet search history. I opened his OnlyFans account and saw that he was subscribed to a woman named Dolly Dearest 47. Her profile picture showed a smiling blonde woman dressed in bright pink. I didn't really know what to do from there, so I clicked on one of her videos. What I saw next absolutely horrified me. The video showed this woman talking directly to the camera. She was presenting a life-sized human doll that she'd made. The doll looked exactly like me. In the video, she mentioned Tommy by name. She called him her most loyal subscriber. Then, still smiling at the camera, she started to torture the mannequin. She cut off some of its fingers. She took a blowtorch to the top of its head. She did many other unspeakable things. And because the mannequin looked identical to me, it was like I was watching someone torture me. I felt like throwing up. Once the mannequin was a melted, mutilated mess, she turned one more time to the camera and said, "Okay, Tommy, I hope this helps." I wanted to throw his computer at the wall, but I had to find out more. I clicked on other videos where this woman tortured other mannequins. All of them were realistic, and about half of them looked like me. I figured that the rest were based on suggestions from her other loyal subscribers. When I couldn't take any more, I shut down his computer. Since Tommy still wasn't home, I had some time to look around his office. At first, I didn't find anything. Then I opened a cabinet and saw shelves full of weapons. Pliers, knives, flamethrowers. These were all the weapons that Dolly Dearest 47 used in her videos. I was absolutely terrified. I thought Tommy and I were happy together. I had no idea he had such darkness in him. And now he was planning to act on his impulses. He was going to torture and kill me. I had to get out of there. So I raced out of the room, grabbed the backpack of clothes and ran to my car. Unfortunately, Tommy had just gotten back home. He met me in the driveway. He asked what was wrong, and I told him that I just needed to run some errands. He didn't believe me. "You went on my computer, didn't you?" he asked. His expression went blank, and then he started walking toward me. "I can explain," he said. "I can explain." He tried to grab me, but I pushed him out of the way and jumped into my car. He stood outside the window and screamed at me to come back inside. I drove away as fast as I could. I thought about going to my sister, but I knew that Tommy would find me there. It was too risky. So I drove across town and went to my cousin Candace's house. Tommy had never met her before, so I figured he wouldn't think to come here. Candace saw that I was frantic. I told her the whole story. I got out my phone to call the police, but Candace convinced me not to. She said that Tommy hadn't done anything illegal so far, and if I got the police involved now, he'd just explain everything away. I needed to get more evidence first. She convinced me to contact the OnlyFans girl and find out everything I could. If Tommy has said anything to her about his plans, then I could use that to get him arrested. I wasn't sure if that was a good idea, but I did what she said. I sent Dolly Dearest 47 a private message on OnlyFans. She responded immediately. She explained that her clients used her to play out their revenge fantasies, but they never actually acted on them. I asked her if Tommy seemed different, and told her that I found weapons in my office. She waited a bit and then replied, "That's not good. Maybe Tommy's different. Can we do a video call and talk about it?" I sent her a Zoom link and then waited for her to log in. She joined the call, looked at my face for a long, silent moment, and then disconnected. She didn't say a word, and she smiled the whole time. I thought she was trying to help me, but her expression gave me this awful feeling. Why did she want to see my face? My cousin walked into the room and asked what happened. I told her about the call, and she gasped. "What?" I asked. "Where were you standing when the video started?" I showed her where I was, and she pointed toward the family photos on the wall behind me. "I think she just wanted to see you so she could figure out where you were." Chills ran down my spine. I asked Candace if we should call the police now, but she said that maybe she was wrong. Maybe this OnlyFans girl just wanted to scare me. But Candace wasn't wrong. That night, after Candace had gone to sleep, I was sitting in her living room when I saw a figure walking outside the window. I recognized her right away. It was Dolly Dearest, 47. She walked to the front door and twisted the knob. It was locked, of course. I peered out the window next to the door and saw that the front yard was empty. The woman had left. I started walking towards Candace's bedroom to wake her up when I heard a noise in the kitchen. It sounded like footsteps. Slowly, I walked toward the noise and saw that Dolly Dearest 47 had crawled in through one of the windows. She just stood in the middle of the room, holding a backpack and staring at me. "Come here," she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She said, "Because Tommy is my biggest fan." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a flamethrower. She aimed it right at me, still smiling. Without thinking, I jumped out of the window behind me. The glass slashed into me, but I didn't care. I landed on the grass right as the room burst into flame. The curtains caught fire, and then the walls did too. If I had hesitated for a single second, I would have been burned alive. I ran around the side of the house and pounded on my cousin's bedroom window. She woke up and ran to me. I didn't bother explaining because I knew she could feel the heat coming from the other room. I helped her climb out of the window and we raced to the other side of the street as her house burned to the ground. The police and fire department came pretty soon afterwards. My cousin was too much in shock to say anything, so I explained the whole story. They put out the fire and then went inside to look for Dolly Dearest 47. She wasn't there. Later that night, they sent more officers to question Tommy, but he was gone too. Still didn't know where they were, but I live in constant fear that they'll come back.
I'd just gotten out of nursing school this spring, excited to start my first job at the small hospital just outside of our town. I lived in a very rural area in northern Arizona, so the hospital was usually pretty quiet, especially at night. As the new nurse on duty, I often had to take the night shift. I never had a problem with it. In fact, I enjoyed the peace and quiet, and the patients who were awake at those hours often had some interesting stories to tell. It really was a good gig. At least, that's what I thought. I had no idea that this night would be the very last night I worked at this place. I had just clocked in, and the head nurse, Margaret, filled me in on the patients. There were only 3 of them that night, all recovering from post-op. I made my rounds as usual, introducing myself to each of the patients. One was an older man who'd gotten his hip replaced. The second was a middle-aged woman who was so looped out on pain meds that she barely acknowledged me. They both seemed normal, business as usual. When I got to the third patient, a younger man named Paul who'd just gotten his tonsils out, I started getting a strange feeling. Paul seemed nice and everything. He asked for a popsicle, but otherwise seemed to be friendly and low maintenance. But there was just something about him, something that made me distrust him instantly. By about 2 in the morning, I looked around for Margaret, but she wasn't there. She must have been on her break. By then, the first 2 patients were asleep, but I could still hear Paul in his room singing quietly to himself. It sounded like some old folk song from centuries ago, the kind of song that a young person like Paul would never sing. I entered his room to see how he was doing. Paul sat on his bed. I tried to tell him that he needed to lie back down, but he just ignored me. He kept on singing, looking straight into the shadowy corner of the room. I figured he hadn't heard me, but he really needed to get some sleep, so I walked over and I gently placed my hand on his shoulder. Still not turning towards me, he whispered, "Just let me finish singing her this song, okay? I'm almost done." "Her?" I asked. There was no one else in the room. "Her," he said, pointing toward the dark, empty corner. Through my training, I knew that if patients ever showed signs of psychosis, I'd need to report to the doctor so that he could handle it. But there weren't any doctors here, and I didn't know where our head nurse was. I'd have to deal with this myself. Figured I had to be as gentle as possible. "And what song are you singing?" I asked. He turned to look at me now, and I could see that his eyes were unfocused. I knew he was on some heavy pain medicine, but those eyes didn't look like they were sleepy. They looked unhinged. "It's the song she heard on the day she died," he said. I very quickly pulled my hand away from his shoulder. I had no idea what to tell him, but I knew I wasn't equipped to handle something like this. I needed to get out of that room and talk to Margaret. "Okay," I said. "I'll let you get back to your song, but after that, you really should get some rest." He giggled. I started backing out of the room, looking at the patient and the shadowy corner. Before I left, though, I realized that there was something strange in that room. The corner was covered in a shadow, but I couldn't tell where the shadow came from. The lights were in the center of the ceiling, but there weren't any objects nearby to cast a shadow like that. And then I saw the shadow move. It expanded, its edges becoming clearer, and I swear to you that it looked like the outline of a person sitting cross-legged on the floor. I ran out of there as fast as I could. Margaret was back at the front desk, casually scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me, slightly annoyed at the interruption, and asked if everything was okay. I couldn't tell her that I'd seen a shadow because she would have thought I was crazy. Instead, I told her that Paul was showing signs of psychosis and I wanted her to check on him. She huffed loudly. "I'll be right back," she said, and trudged towards Paul's room. I could still hear the faint echoes of Paul's song. I waited in the empty main room while Margaret dealt with the patient. My heart was racing, and I felt like a total idiot for getting scared about nothing. Paul was just a normal guy on some medication. The shadow was just a shadow. There was absolutely nothing wrong in that room. Then I heard a single scream, Margaret's, and I ran back toward the door. I paused outside for a few seconds, struggling to keep my emotions in check, and I slowly entered the room. Paul was still sitting on his bed. His song was over, and he just stayed there, quiet and motionless. I couldn't see his face because he was still staring at the corner. I didn't see Margaret anywhere. "Paul?" I said, slowly approaching. "Paul, is everything okay?" "Yes," he said without turning. As I got closer, I saw that the shadow had darkened even more. Its outline was more defined. This was clearly the shape of a person. I could see shoulders and arms and long hair. This was the shadow of a woman. It didn't move. "Paul?" I asked. "Where's Margaret?" He didn't understand. "The nurse who just came in here?" I clarified. "Oh," he said. "Well, my song ended, and after I finish my song, she always gets a little hungry." Hungry? What the hell did he mean? I knew he was talking about the shadow, or whatever it was he saw in the corner. How could a shadow be hungry? And where was Margaret? I could see his face now, completely blank. I looked around the room, but there was no sign that Margaret had been there at all. Everything was empty and sterile. That is, until I noticed something on the floor just in front of that shadow. It was a single shoe, a nurse's shoe. Margaret's shoe. And the shadow shifted again, as if it was leaning back against the wall. Then a single sound came out of that shadow, one that I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was a burp.